the introduction aspect that covers the different types of cloud computing services, what Active Directory is, tenant is, and the components within Microsoft Entra, or what we call as Active Directory, as users, licensing, groups, service principal, or apps. Then three major core crux, that is Azure DevOps, Azure Portal, and Fabric Portal. And then we would be looking into the practical demo with respect to how to create resource groups, capacities on which your Fabric would run, and some of the other aspects within Azure. Similarly, we would be creating a respective components like workspaces, capacity, and DevOps integration in the Microsoft Fabric portal, and majorly the Fabric admin portal, wherein you would be taking a look into the administrative capabilities within Microsoft Fabric. Now, sir, now for that, one of the prerequisite was to set up your own tenant, Azure subscription, and Azure DevOps. For that, I have already shared some of the links on how to enable your own Active Directory or how to enable your own Azure subscription, which in turn would allow you to have your own tenant. And I'll discuss on what this tenant and other aspects are in this session today. Post this introductory aspect that might take us around 1 week, then we would move on to the Microsoft Fabric and cover some of the major storage layers within that. Post this understanding of the storage layer, we would move on to the data engineering part of that. Now within data engineering part, there are data factory experiences, notebook experiences, and some other non-ETL related data engineering or data synchronization aspect. And then we would focus on real-time data movement. And finally, during those aspects, we would also cover certain Copilot experiences in parallel to the introductory aspect. And then for those who are new to the Power BI world, a basic aspect of Power BI, and then some of the advanced aspect with respect to REST API and automation and deployment pipelines and Azure DevOps CI/CD aspects. So this would be the overall agenda across next 1.5 months. Now, before we proceed to the major aspects, let's move on to the how to enable your Azure subscription or setting up the prerequisite. In order to set up the prerequisite, you all need to log into my.visualstudio.com. Now you have to log in via Microsoft account. Now it can be any account like your Gmail account, Outlook account, etc. But when you log into my.visualstudio.com via that account, in case if that account is not a Microsoft registered account, it would first ask you to register that personal account as a Microsoft account. Once you register it, then it would drop you into this page. Now, couple of weeks earlier, now once you log into this page, you would see the multiple benefits that you can avail in the Microsoft ecosystem with respect to that account. But these are time limited ones. Those won't be available for more than 1 year. As you all can see, some of them are for 6 months. Some of them are only for 30 days to 1 year. So on that aspect, once you log into my.visualstudio.com via your personal account that has been registered as a Microsoft account, you can go and click on Try Azure for free. Now this change came couple of months earlier. Prior to that, as per the documentation that I had shared, it contains Activate. Now the reason for that change, And remember, this discussion that I'm having is because the similar concept is also applicable for something called as Microsoft Fabric trial that I'll discuss in a couple of sessions later. But we'll revisit this discussion. Unfortunately, what has been happening is most of the folks or organizations, rather than buying a paid capacity for production aspects, are leveraging this free subscriptions or free trials on account by account basis and making these developmental or sandbox environments as their own production environments. And they're misusing this feature that Microsoft is providing by creating duplicate versions of the same account and in turn leveraging them for production purposes, which should not be the case. As this suggests, this is only to have a sandbox environment or a test environment for your learning purposes. So because of this misuse, rather than directly activating it, Microsoft has now moved to try Azure for free. So the first step is you click on try Azure for free. Post that, it will take you to this page. Now here you need to provide some of your details. Now one catch is, in case if you are using the mobile number or the email address via which you had previously activated any of this free subscription, then Microsoft won't allow you to do it again. So for that, you have to use a new mobile number or new email address or the combination of both. Post that, you have to activate. And then it would ask you for your credit card details. Now the credit card details is basically in case if you're overextending your reach, you would get certain credits, and that you can see you get $200 credit. If you are extending your changes beyond $200, then the amount would be deducted from your credit card. Hence, the credit card details is needed. In that, now to validate the authenticity of your credit card, a $1 transaction would happen and it would be back or credited back into your account once the authentication is successful in a span of some days or immediately as well. Post that, you would get an Azure subscription. Now with Azure subscription comes something called as a tenant. Those aspects we'll discuss once we deep dive into the conceptual functional aspect of the session. So any queries on how to activate your free Azure subscription before we move ahead, before we move to the actual aspect?
Yeah, Nandan, actually I tried all the way, okay, using new email ID and new mobile number, okay, but I'm not able to still uh, like access the trial.
So check the region as well. Not in all regions that they provide the subscription. So in
So,
certain cases, certain regions are blocked, correct?
okay, okay.
So depending on which region you have selected, that might make a difference as well. Who among you all have activated your subscription up till now? Can you all raise
Me.
your hand? Okay. So Ramesh, post this call, you all can you can discuss in the team's WhatsApp group as well with this team, and they can help you out.
Okay, sure.
Now, moving on to the core aspect, that is what Microsoft Fabric is. Now, this aspect is with the Microsoft Fabric, correct? So what is Microsoft Fabric? So Microsoft Fabric is basically a software as a service tool that Microsoft has created, and it is an end-to-end analytics and data platform that is designed for enterprises that require a unified solution. So basically, Microsoft Fabric is a software as a service tool, and I'll discuss what software as a service is in a couple of minutes. And it is an all-in-one analytic solutions for enterprises that covers everything from data movement to data transformation, data storage, data science, real-time analytics, and business intelligence. And all of this is hosted on something called as a logical concept of something called as a one lake. Now, these terminologies we will cover next week of what one lake everything is. This week, we would be majorly focusing on some of the concepts, core concepts of software as a service and other aspects. Correct? So now let me move on to the next aspect, that is software as a service. Now, to understand software as a service, we have to take one step back. So before, let's move on to around 20 years back. In 20 years back, you all might have majorly heard something called as on-premises majorly. The cloud was not in booming aspect around 20 years back. Now, what do we mean by on-premises? Let's say that I am a new startup. DataSharks is the new startup. Now, eventually, I need to manage the data of all the transactions or other aspects that I'm doing. Correct? So for that, I need a storage location. Now, that storage location can be a server that I can bring, I can buy out, and then I can place it within my own home or in my own office location. Now, consider the server similar to a laptop, correct? Since I am an organization, my server needs to be on 24/7 because if any user wants to access the data would flow from the server itself. Hence, it needs to be active 24/7. So in case if a server needs to be active 24/7, imagine server similar to your laptop. It would be in heated state, correct? So along with managing or buying and managing the server, I also need to take care of its maintenance. Like I need to have a specific room to have that server present, wherein I need to have a coolant system like AC or something on 24/7 so that my server does not get overheated and it functions in its proper state. Now, along with I managing my own responsibilities as a co-founder of this startup, I also have to manage the server and its maintenance. So for that, I'll have some operational team present who would manage and monitor the temperature across the room, the server, etc. And imagine if eventually my startup blooms to a very major extent, the server that I bought initially might not be sufficient to preserve the data. I might have to add in some more servers. So for that, I have to buy, there might be some downtime. But everything is happening within the premises that I govern. That is what is in layman terminology can be called as traditional on-premises, wherein every organization had their own servers which they hosted within their own location. And then the cooling aspect can be considered as a data center, wherein all the servers are present in a room, which can be termed as a data center, wherein the temperatures are being maintained properly. Now, in case if I have to explain it in a layman terminology, let's use the concept of pizza as a service. Imagine that I have to make a pizza for my colleagues. So in case of traditional on-premises concept, I had to bring each and every component myself, meaning I had to buy an oven, gas, baking soda, pizza dough, tomatoes, and I had to make the sauce myself, everything, correct? Cheese, toppings. And post that, I had to make up the pizza base. I had to add the toppings on that pizza base, heat it in the oven, and place it on the dining table and eat it. So everything from scratch had to be managed by myself. That was your traditional on-premises. So for traditional on-premises, the maintenance, a separate maintenance team got involved. So automatically my operational expenses got involved. Operational expenses are basically expenses that I need for operational activities like maintenance of the servers, etc. Along with that, there was a capital expenditure. What do we mean by capital expenditure? I had to bring the servers myself, correct? Servers, connectivity, the coolant aspect. So that is one can term as capital expenditure. So there was a major capital expenditure and an operational expenditure along with other costs involved. And in case if I had to scale up, there used to be some downtime because I could not directly add a hardware on top of the existing hardware and then without any downtime. Correct? I had to first have a downtime wherein turn off, then integrate new servers, etc. So even scaling up used to take certain time, that leading to some downtime in organizations. So this was the traditional on-premises. But then came the cloud technologies. So today, in today's world, there are three major cloud providers. Microsoft, the current call that we all are having, Google, which is GCP, Microsoft Cloud is called Azure, Google Cloud is called GCP, and Amazon called AWS. Now, all cloud services provide different types of cloud computing services. Now, those cloud computing services can be classified into multiple aspects, but the three major aspects are infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, and software as a service. Now, within that, there are multiple other classifications like database as a service, network as a service, etc. But the three major categorizations are software as a service, platform as a service, and infrastructure as a service. Now, let's take a look into each of them. Now, in case of infrastructure as a service, correct? In terms of pizza equivalent, correct? The pizza dough, this ketchup, the toppings and cheese, everything was provided to me from the vendor itself. Unlike on premises wherein I had to prepare it everything, here everything was provided to me. I just had to bake it in the oven and present it myself on the dining table and eat. Meaning, the cloud provider provides us with a server itself. We need not maintain the server. Meaning, I need not buy this physical server. The physical server and the data center and the cooling aspect is being taken care by the cloud provider. They would provide you with a server. Post that, whatever we make with this server, that's our responsibility. Meaning, in case of infrastructure, the cloud vendor provides me with an infra. On that infra, I can set up my own database. I can set up my own softwares, etc. That is infrastructure as a service. But the catch is, they provided me with the server or the infrastructure. But the software that are being installed, now every software has an upgradation after some point of the time, correct? Or on servers, let's best consider laptop, correct? Consider laptop as one of your server. Within the laptop, you are responsible for setting up the software, setting up the antivirus, etc. Correct? Or upgrade the corresponding software. So consider that concept similar in the infrastructure as a service, wherein though the vendor is providing me with the infra, whatever installations, upgrades, needs to be done, that won't be taken care by the vendor. That needs to be taken care by me only. Hence, automatically, in case if there is some upgrades, maintenance, operational team needs to get involved, because as a core crux of my organization, I can't keep on upgrading and checking across those aspects. Correct. So I might have a separate team, the infrastructure operational team. Hence, there is some amount of operational expenses involved with infrastructure as a service. But it provides me with some flexibility as to what softwares, what version of tool I need to be present within my server. That is infrastructure as a service. Now, coming to platform as a service. In case of a platform as a service, everything is provided to you, meaning the platform is provided to you. Now, what you do with the platform, that's up to you. Meaning, the entire pizza, hot pizza is being delivered to you via Zomato or Swiggy, and then you remove the packing and you place it yourself on the dining table and you have that pizza. That is platform as a service. Now, in case of platform as a service, since the platform, the cloud vendor itself takes care of all the upgrades in the backend, we need not worry about managing or upgrading the databases. Everything is happening in the backend automatically by the vendor themselves. Since all the upgrades, aspect, etc. are being taken care by the vendor, the operational expense reduces, because now I need not have a dedicated team that would keep on upgrading it, checking the patches on a monthly basis, because all those aspects are being automatically taken care by the cloud service provider. So this is platform as a service. But since the vendor themselves are taking care of all the auto upgrades, in case if I need a specific version rather than the latest version, that might not be possible. Hence, depending on the use cases, correct? Imagine that I want to work on a specific X version of a software, not the latest version. So in such cases, it becomes critical to have infrastructure as a service, because it's there that we govern this. I'm talking with respect to cloud. Of course, on premises also you can have your own version. So this provides that flexibility, whereas that flexibility is not present here. So depending upon your different aspects, we all make a choice between platform as a service or infrastructure as a service. Then comes software as a service. In terms of our pizza equivalent, it's like I go to the restaurant, I order it to the restaurant, and they place it on my dining table and I eat it. So it's like I'm dining out. Meaning, the vendor provides a software that one can leverage for their own purposes. Now, what does that mean? Software. So it's basically a cloud software that can be accessed via internet, and the users need not manage the infrastructure or platforms, but just the application. So can anyone among you all provide me an apt example of what software as a service can be? We are already using that now.
WhatsApp, Teams.
WhatsApp, Teams, connect. Microsoft Teams that we are currently on call with, we are accessing it via internet, correct? Or a software in case if you use a Microsoft Teams app. WhatsApp, Gmail or Outlook. These are what your software as a service applications are. Now, infrastructure as a service basically provides a virtualized computing resources. Because, as I said, it's virtualized for the users, but it is physically being hosted on some server in a data center that is governed or managed by the cloud vendor itself. But for us, it's a virtualized computing resources like server, storage, and networking. But the users are responsible for managing the operating system, applications, and runtime that is running within those virtualized servers. And platform as a service basically offers a platform to develop, run, and manage applications without dealing with the infrastructure. So the developers can focus on the code aspect because the provider manages the servers and the operating servers or the systems themselves. So in the cloud service model, infrastructure as a service, correct, provides us with a greater flexibility, and infrastructure as a service is majorly for IT administrators and network architects, the major work, because the server maintenance has to be managed by them, upgrades. Platform as a service is majorly for software developers, wherein, as I said, the coders can do the developers can do their code aspect, and everything is managed by the cloud vendor itself. And software as a service is majorly for the end users, because everything is managed by the cloud. We just have to use the application or the software. So Microsoft Fabric is basically a software as a service tool that Microsoft provides that covers everything from data movement, data transformation, data storage, data science, and real-time analytics and business intelligence. Now, those who are familiar with Azure PaaS, and in that Azure Synapse Analytics, one can consider Microsoft Fabric as a SaaS version of Azure Synapse Analytics, but with more extended features and functionalities, because Microsoft is focusing too much on Microsoft Fabric's enhancements, unlike Azure Synapse. But in layman terminology, one can consider it as a SaaS version of Azure Synapse Analytics. So before we proceed ahead, any queries on this services? If no, then let's move on to the next aspect. Now, the common terminologies that you would hear across, not only in Microsoft Fabric, but in Microsoft Cloud, that is Azure, is tenant. Correct. Now, can someone state me what tenant is? Consider tenant as the literal aspect in the English terminology, a tenant. Can someone tell me what tenant can be? And team, let's keep this session interactive if possible.
Tenants means we are living in a cloud and using all the services.
I'll say correct, partially correct, or 70 to 80% correct. Would anyone else like to give a try?
What I feel a tenant is probably a space wherein the company hosts it. You can say all its in starting the infrastructure or the starting point from where or a list of all the employees, things like that, licenses, lists of all the employees.
No, that's a part of Active Directory.
Active Directory, okay.
Correct. So tenant is at the top of the hierarchy. So basically in Azure, correct. In layman terminology, tenant, let's say I am a tenant in this building, correct. So that
Dedicated
building,
space we can say, right? For
sorry.
an tenant is a dedicated space for an organization, right? Where we can store.
So somewhat on that aspect, but I'll be more clear on what tenant is. Correct. So in Azure, correct. Azure meaning going forward, when I use the term Azure, it is Microsoft Cloud Platform. Correct. So in Azure, basically a tenant is a digital representation of an organization or a user that uses Microsoft Cloud services. What do I mean by that? Whenever I want to do a business with Microsoft in Azure, correct? Microsoft would provide me with a unique ID, correct? That is basically the tenant. So tenant is a representation of an organization or a user in Microsoft ecosystem that uses Microsoft Cloud services. So basically, it's a Microsoft Entra ID entity that's associated with a domain like Microsoft.com. What do I mean by that? Let's go to the literal aspect of tenant. Correct. In tenant, let's consider I am staying in a building. That building is the Microsoft cloud. So now the building would have an owner. So the owner would provide me with a unique ID for my interaction with him. That is the flat number is my unique ID. Correct. So every user that would come to that building would have a unique ID associated with that owner. So that's like a representation of that user with the owner, with that business. So tenant can be considered similarly. So tenant refers to a single dedicated and trusted instance of Azure Active Directory, and it gets created automatically when you sign up for a Microsoft Cloud Service subscription. I'll come to this concept Active Directory a little later. But the major aspect is it gets created automatically when you sign up for a Microsoft Cloud Service subscription. So once you all activated the Azure subscription, the free subscription, a tenant got created to you, for you all, your own personal tenant, because you all went into a business with Microsoft. So in broader terms, when your organization signs up for cloud service subscription, an organization can represent an actual organization or an individual user like you all. A tenant therefore represents a single organization, identity, or a person, and a subscription that you all activated, correct, in Azure can be considered as a logical container into which resources can be created, configured, and installed. What I mean by that is, let's take a look into the practical aspect. Now, in order to log in to Azure, you need to log into, there is a URL called portal.azure.com. So you all need to log in to portal.azure.com via the account with which you have activated your Azure subscription. So in this case, my account is datasharks@yldf7.onmicrosoft.com. So once you log in to the Azure portal, this is the Azure portal homepage. Once you log into Azure portal by logging into portal.azure.com via the account via which you activated your subscription, correct? First aspect is there is something called as tenant properties. It won't be available in the homepage directly. In the homepage, the frequently used services are being seen. Since you are yet to log in into the leverage any of the functionalities, so first step is for you all to search in the search bar. Search for tenant. Now, in case if I click on tenant properties, it would provide me all the tenant details. Correct? If you see, my tenant is hosted in Singapore. This is the actual region in which it is hosted. And the geographical region in which my data center is in the Asia, Southeast Asia to be more specific. The language that all the folks within my organization needs to have is English. And these are some of the other details, like in case if anyone with, as I said, an organization would have a tenant, correct? Imagine if it is an organization. And in case if in an organization, if anyone wants to reach out to the tenant admin, how to reach out? So for that, there is a technical point of contact that needs to be provided so that anyone who is part of this organization, which has enabled this subscription tenant, he or she would be able to see this data, but this would be read only for them. Now, of all this, can you see there's something called as a tenant ID? Now, this tenant ID is the unique ID, the unique digital representation of my work with Microsoft Cloud Service. Now, all over global, this would be a unique ID. So the tenant ID is a unique ID that digitally represents me with Microsoft. So in case if I have any issues with Microsoft Cloud Service, I won't tell this is my user ID. I would provide them that I am having an issue in this tenant. I'll provide them this tenant ID, and then they would automatically be able to go and check all the details associated with this tenant, because that's my unique print with them. This is what tenant is: a digital representation of an organization, an identity, or an individual user working with Microsoft. Now, this is the tenant ID. There is a tenant name as well. That's a mandatory aspect. Can a tenant ID, sorry, as I said, tenant ID is unique globally. No other organization or user can have the same ID as my tenant ID. Now, can a tenant name or similar to tenant ID, would the tenant name also be unique globally? Yes or no?
Yes. Yes, Nandan.
So, who all agree this is a yes?
Say that
I
again.
think it's no. It can be based on the tenant ID only. That is my thought.
So the question is, as I said, the tenant ID is unique globally.
Yeah.
Meaning no other organization, resource, user, or identity can have the same ID as mine. Correct? So my question is, would the tenant name also follow a similar approach of globally unique, or can it be a duplicate name as well?
It can be duplicate, I guess.
And be
Because that
duplicate, yeah.
can
Yeah,
Even
it
I
can.
agree.
Okay,
I
I'm
think so.
hearing some of them saying duplicate, some of them saying. So, people, can you all raise your hand who all assume that, who all are stating that it can be duplicate? Okay. The answer to that is yes, it can be duplicate. And it's because it can be duplicate, hence it is write mode enabled. Since tenant ID needs to be unique, correct? In case if anything wants to be unique, it would be a read only mode. So here I can just copy it, but here I can actually change it. I can make it as YLDF78 and I can make the corresponding change in my aspect. So I'm able to save it. Now imagine there can be some other user who would be having the same aspect, correct? YLDF78. Correct? Or let's say I work at Accenture, correct? So I can add Accenture as the tenant name. Now Accenture as a tenant name has already been bought by Accenture. So can I have it? So the answer to that is yes, because the uniqueness that Microsoft identifies at a tenant level is not via the name, but via the IDs. Now let me revert it back to my original. So a tenant ID is the digital representation which is globally unique of an organization with the Microsoft. Tenant name is basically, rather than having a generic GUID name, I can provide a proper name. As a startup, since my startup is Data Sharks, I can make the tenant name as Data Sharks to keep it much more precise for users within my organization to understand rather than having a GUID name. Because whenever you activate any Azure subscription, by default an tenant gets created and that tenant name is not under your authority. Microsoft automatically provides a tenant name to the same. Post that you can change it. Remember this aspect that I said. This I didn't provide the while activating the Azure subscription. Correct? Did anyone of you all got any pop-up as to what your tenant name should be? No. Microsoft automatically provides a name. Remember this aspect because we would be discussing this aspect tomorrow or today in case if we do get the time. So a tenant is like a digital representation. Any queries on the concept of tenant? So any aspects that you do should be with respect to the tenant ID, not with respect to the tenant name, because a tenant name can be duplicate.
And
So
then this region and region and location of the data center, this Singapore, this is automatically assigned, right? We don't select.
In case of when you're buying this, it provided you with a region, correct? Like India, Singapore, etc. Correct? That's the
because it's trial, it is by default, is it that way?
No.
If you are buying, then you can select the region.
While activating your Azure subscription, you had to provide a drop down of the regions, correct? That you saw. Correct? In that you can see which region you want to, which region you want your Azure subscription to be. The region Azure subscription is basically the region of the tenant itself.
Okay, got it.
Clear?
Yes.
Now, what do we mean by subscription? Let me move to the presentation. A subscription in Azure can be considered as a logical container into which your resources and services can be created, configured, and installed. Meaning, tenant is like my ID. Correct? Let's consider that now I paid the owner of a building certain amount. So he allocated me GF3, ground floor 3. So GF3 became my tenant ID. Now within GF3, the room within GF3, the entire space within GF3 can be considered as a subscription, meaning I can utilize the space. Consider the space equivalent to the credits. Now, within the room, I can make within my home, GF3, I can make multiple subsections or rooms, and I can arrange one room as my furniture room, one room as my PlayStation room, etc. Correct? So consider subscription equivalent to that. A subscription is basically your home within which you would be creating all your resources and services that you would be leveraging from Microsoft. So within subscription, so any queries up till now on what subscription is?
Nandan, I have one query. While selecting that, activating that subscription, I haven't select specific region. I think I ignored that drop down. Like I'm not sure which region I have choose.
So that you can go and check
Not
in
in.
the Active Directory, correct? So once you log into portal.azure.com, go to the tenant properties. The tenant property would now be read only, and there you would see the geo in which
Okay,
your subscription is hosted.
so there is no restriction, right, to select the region.
So basically, Microsoft provides this free trial only in specific geos. Since you are already activated, it should not be a concern. Now,
Okay.
why would geo matter or the region matter? Because imagine I am a startup in India, correct? In case if I buy a data center that is hosted in US, so my data has to travel from US to India. There might be some latency, though the latency might be 2 to 3 milliseconds to seconds, correct? For me, it might not be a major aspect since I'm a small startup, but imagine organizations like or apps like Amazon, wherein you, which is global, wherein you have to book something, correct? So at that time, imagine if that data center is only present in US and I want to book it from here. Just to select the cart, if it takes 2 seconds, would anyone be interested? No, correct? So depending on the benefits of where your applications would be leveraged, one has to select the corresponding geo. That's the significance of geo. And it's not only specific to Microsoft, but it is common across all cloud services. Correct?
Okay. Yeah.
Ramesh?
Yeah, and then actually I had a question on like tenant name. So while it's generated by Microsoft itself, so why it's duplicate? Can be duplicate.
As I said, it's a unique ID, correct? As an organization, would you like to tell that? Okay, I give that example a couple of aspects later, correct?
Okay.
Tomorrow. But as an organization, would you like to, in case if anyone joins, basically, okay, I'll explain that concept in detail later, but let's just take an example. Correct. Let me go to the, can you see here? My account name is Data Sharks. That is the username at the rate yldf7.onmicrosoft.com. Correct.
Yeah, yeah.
In case if I send an email from this account to you all, would you trust this is a proper organizational account or would you consider this as a spam account? Correct. Because the users that are created within the organization follow the format of username at the rate tenantname.onmicrosoft.com. Correct. So if you need some GUID values for to generate uniqueness as the tenant ID. If your tenant name also contains such GUID values, long GUID values, you cannot have 4 digits uniqueness. It would be a long one. So then it would be at the rate a long dot on Microsoft.com. Would it be preferable? That's the first aspect. Second aspect is YLDF7 does not signify anything about my organization, correct? But if I would have renamed my tenant name as Data Sharks, even if there is a duplicate name somewhere else, it won't matter. And I'll tell you why. Because there's something called as a domain as well that would come a couple of minutes later. But this tenant name that you all are seeing here is within the organization users themselves. No external user would be able to access this as long as you externally provide them. So within the organization, I am renaming it. It's not to some other organization that they would be able to understand this. So it does not matter. So the name is for a better understanding rather than as a unique identifier.
Yeah,
Clear?
got it. Yeah, got it. Thank you.
So now, as I said, subscription is like your home, and within home you can have multiple aspects, correct? So within Azure Active Directory, sorry, within Azure portal, search for subscriptions. This would show you only one subscription. Now, why is it showing two subscriptions for me? And I'll come to that as well, and I'll explain the chart. But it would show you one subscription for you all, since you all have activated one subscription. Now, within this subscription, the credit is given at a subscription level. You pay the rent at a home level, not at individual room level. Whatever you do within that home, it's up to you. Correct? Similar is the case with subscription. You have a credit or a cost associated at a subscription level. Now, within that subscription, whatever you do, of course, that does get pay as you go. I'll come to other aspect, but in a layman terminology, since you all have activated your credit, I'm speaking in terms of credit, but the cost applications we'll discuss eventually in a couple of days. So every subscription would have a current cost or a credit associated with that. That is your subscription. Now, imagine that I have two different startups. A training startup like DataSearch and a consulting startup, let's say XYZ. So I have two different startups, correct? Now, for two different startups, I can have two different tenants, correct? Because I want to bifurcate both of my organizations separately. I want to keep training organization different and my consulting organization different. Since tenant is like an organizational aspect, I can have two different tenants. So while buying with organization, Microsoft, I'll buy another separate tenant. So in that case, a single user or an organization can have two different tenants. And I'll show that practically as well. Now, within every tenant would have a corresponding tenant name, correct? So for this tenant one, my tenant name is Contoso. And for tenant 2, the tenant name is Fabricam. Now, within my training, DataSearch training tenant, correct? I can have multiple subscriptions, meaning within the building is like Microsoft. Within the building, okay, now as an owner, imagine I have a big joint family, correct? So for that, what I'll do is, I'll work with two different buildings, two different owners, because my entire family cannot be in one itself, correct? Meaning I want my side of family in one building, my wife's side of family in another building. Due to some reasons, we want a separation. That can be business separation or anything, security separation. That's up to the organization to decide. But in the layman terminology, let's say I want my family to be in one building, my wife's family to be in another building, correct? So these are like two different tenants, two different businesses with Microsoft only. Meaning wing A, wing B in the entire ecosystem of the owner. So wing A and wing B are different tenants. Or let me take another example rather than confusing. Within one wing, there might be multiple rooms, correct? So I bought GF3, GF2, GF1. So I bought three different tenants. I am the same owner, I am the same organization that is having three different tenants with my owner, building owner. In sync? So as a user, I can have multiple tenants. Now, within the tenant, I can have multiple, sorry, the earlier example was correct. Let's consider wing A and wing B, correct? Let's say I am part of wing A, which is tenant A, wing B, which is tenant B. Now within the same tenant, I can have different subscriptions, meaning I can have first floor and second floor in simple aspect, correct? Now, why would I have that logical bifurcation? Imagine that I want some set of users to focus only on networking aspect. So that subscription or that logical layer would only be for network folks. So the cost and other aspects that I can control at a subscription level would be for the network level, network team. The other subscription can be for the development team for coding aspects. So in layman terminology, one can state that an organization can have multiple tenants. So it is 1:n relationships or cardinality. Within one tenant, there can be multiple subscriptions. So automatically for one organization, there can be multiple subscriptions associated. That's what we saw here, correct? Wherein
Nandan,
my
is it
account,
Nandan, is
Go
it
ahead.
possible one subscription have the multiple tenant as well?
No, I'll come to that as well, correct? Give me a couple of minutes. So if you see here, this is my account, correct? Consider this account as an organization. Now this account is part of multiple tenants. How to check that? If you click on settings, you would be able to see directories and subscriptions. Directories are like the tenants or the domain. Can you see I am a part of 3 active directories or 3 tenants. One is YLDF7, another is Data Sharks. Now you remember I had renamed the tenant to Data Sharks as well, correct? That was a duplicate. But how to identify whether my name is similar, my tenant name is similar to the original tenant name? Here, this was the tenant name that was provided to me by Microsoft, and this is the domain, YLDF7. These are matching, meaning I have not made any change in the tenant name. Here, the domain name is priyaja.onmicrosoft.com, but my tenant name is DataShark, meaning originally my tenant name when it got created was Priyaja, but I renamed it to Data Sharks. And this is the default directory that you can ignore. So my account or the organization is part of multiple tenants, meaning I am owning multiple tenants. Now within the current tenant, I am owning multiple subscriptions that you all saw, correct? So within the YLDF7 tenant, I am owning 2 different subscriptions. I can own more than 2, or I can even own 1 subscription. So the cardinality is 1:n. Now imagine that we got a question, correct? Can a subscription belong to multiple tenant? The answer is no. Subscription to tenant mapping is 1:1. A subscription can belong to only one tenant. And how to check that? Or imagine that if I want to move a subscription from one tenant to another tenant. If you all remember, I had also provided a screen documentation of Microsoft 365 Enterprise enabling that. But now Microsoft has removed it from the benefit aspect here. But earlier it used to be present. So in that aspect, you get a tenant for yourself. You can buy a tenant for yourself. Not the subscription, but you can buy a tenant. Now, let me go to one of the subscription. Let me click on the subscription, Visual Studio Enterprise subscription. Now here, can you see there is an option that change the directory. Directory meaning the tenant. Since I own multiple tenants, meaning this account is part of multiple tenants, I can change this subscription from the current tenant, that is YLDF7, to the one of the remaining 2 tenants. So I guess this should clarify the query that there is a subscription can belong to only one tenant, and I can move a subscription from one tenant to another tenant that the account or the organization is a part of. Any
What
queries?
do you mean by Nandan? You can move? You can switch, right? You can move means it will still be there in that tenant only, right? That subscription.
No, it would move from the tenant YLDF7 to the tenant Data Sharks in case if I do it.
Change the directory. If you change the directory.
Directory in this UI is the tenant itself.
Okay, okay.
And you see, I am a part of 3 directory or tenants. Directory in terminology of Azure portal is tenant. So I am part of 3 tenants. YLDF7, Data Sharks, and default directory. So directories are tenants. Correct. Now I have 2 subscriptions. Correct. Now this subscription is a part of currently YLDF7 tenant. What I can do is I can move this from this tenant to another tenant. But if you can see, correct, I understand that changing directory does not transfer some of the resources like Azure role-based access control assignment, managed identity. Now these aspects I'll discuss tomorrow or day after tomorrow. So at that time, let's bring back what does this, someone do remind me on this aspect in case if I do forget, what does this check mark resemble? Because when you move, see, within the
what does it move exactly? If it is not moving this,
it moves the code aspect. See, I do have code, correct? Now code is user agnostic. A code is a physical code, correct? Or a database that I host is a physical database that is hosted, correct? It's a code. That code would get shifted over. That database would get shifted over to that tenant. But the users associated with that code won't be, may or may not be moved over. And that's what we'll discuss tomorrow, once we discuss the Active Directory concept tomorrow.
And one directory is mapped to one tenant, right? You cannot have multiple directories in a tenant, is it?
Directory is a tenant.
Okay.
Correct. So if you see here, the directory name is basically the tenant name itself. So tenant name is the directory name which has a domain.
Okay.
Now the directory name and the tenant, the directory and tenant are 1:1. But one tenant can have multiple domain names that we'll take a look across in couple of minutes.
And this directory and Active Directory, that concept is different, right?
That is different. Directory name here represents the tenant name. So directory
Only
here
tenant.
is the tenant.
Nothing to do with Active Directory.
No.
Okay.
So any other query before we move ahead?
Yeah, Nandan. So in practical, like suppose a company want to adopt the Fabric, okay? So like how can go with the like multiple tenant or single tenant? So that I want to understand.
So as I said, tenant is like a some aspect, correct, that I'm doing business. Now it depends on organization to organization how they want to do it. Imagine that I have a development environment, I have a test environment, and I have a production environment. Correct?
Yeah.
Every organization would have a development, test, and a production environments for the developers to work on. You all agree, correct? Now, as an organization, what I can do is I can have 3 different tenants pertaining to three different environments. I can have a dev tenant, test tenant, and a prod tenant. Correct. But corresponding to every tenant, I'll have a corresponding account created. So in that case, I'll have to manage three different accounts. So Ramesh, hold on to that question, correct? Tomorrow when we will discuss users in detail, correct? At that time, I'll explain the aspect of why doesn't every organization have multiple tenants for easy security aspect? Because the maintenance also increases significantly with that, correct? So one has to take a call between managing a tenant, managing multiple tenants, or managing a tenant. So that all would come in next, those aspects I'll clear in next couple of days.
Okay.
So do hold on to those questions and make a note of that and we can discuss it.
Yes, sure.
Clear? So now we saw that a subscription can be moved from one tenant to another. Correct. Now within subscription, let me go to the subscription. There are multiple properties like access control, activity log, etc. This will take a look deep down by in the coming weeks. But one of the major aspect is the cost management. Basically, you can have every subscription would have a cost or a credit, predefined credit, correct? Here in the cost analysis aspect, I can take a look as to what all components, what all aspects I have been using across and how the cost has been across this month. So I can see here, I have a Microsoft Fabric and I spent 2,300 rupees on Microsoft Fabric and some of the other services that I'm using are databases, etc. So this managing a subscription is a very critical role because I have to manage my credit should not over exceed. In case if my credit is peaking, I need to set up an alert of a cost so that I can reach out to the respective team, etc. So that's one of the critical role within an organization. Correct. So this we'll discuss a couple of in couple of days, some in detail these aspects. But for now, moving on to the hierarchical aspect for you all to understand. As I said, tenant, above tenant comes the organization or the user who is purchasing it, correct? So a tenant, or let's go with organization. An organization can have multiple tenants. Every tenant can have multiple subscriptions within it. And I can move a subscription from one tenant to another tenant. Now, before we move ahead with this aspect, let's focus on some of the concepts of the corresponding Azure portal. Up till now, we discussed tenant and Azure subscription. So Azure subscription is a logical container that groups resources and services within Azure. Then Active Directory. You have something called as Microsoft Entra ID. If I click on Microsoft Entra ID, it was previously called as Azure Active Directory. So what do we mean by Azure Active Directory? Or can anyone state me what is an Active Directory? Active Directory. See, these are
Managing people aspects, as Anamika mentioned.
Okay. Anything else?
Manage licenses.
User identity.
User
Managing
identity.
user identity.
Okay. Anything else? So basically Active Directory, or in this case Azure Active Directory or Microsoft Entra ID, can be considered as a catalog of users, identities, and applications. And I'll explain more. So basically Microsoft Entra ID or the Azure Active Directory, these are same terminology. Earlier it used to be called as Azure Active Directory, whereas now it has been renamed as Microsoft Entra ID. Is basically a cloud-based service that manages the users, identities, and access to applications and resources. Now, what do we mean by that? Now, as an organization, let's take the owner, correct? Now, I am part of the tenant. Let's say that I took a, let's say that I paid Microsoft or the owner a monthly rent of 20K for a room. Now, within that room, I am converting it to a PG, correct? Wherein I am allowing students to come and stay in that, and I am creating multiple different subsections or bunkers within that home that I bought within GF3. So I need to maintain a list of users, correct? And their respective machines. Let's say if they bought some electronic machines, I want to manage those, correct? So I have to manage those list or a catalog that can be considered as Active Directory. So it's basically a catalog of users, identities, and devices and applications that are hosted within the home. Now, applications meaning, let's say that I am providing that home as a PG, correct? I do need to set up some prerequisites, like I need to install a boiler. I need to install a fridge. So this boiler and fridge are like applications that are predefined or devices, correct? I do need to make a list of that, correct? So that I am able to manage those aspects in case if anyone is leaving or shifting from the organizations. So one can consider that Active Directory is basically a catalog of users. Groups I'll come and discuss tomorrow, correct? Groups is basically logical aggregation of users for some specific purposes. Let's take a look afterwards. Then there are applications, identities, and devices. Devices meaning every organization might have a laptop or a device provided to the user, correct? You need to register, or let's say the mobile. Since I have not registered anything, it's being seen as empty. But as an organization, some of the organization have a requirement, correct, that you cannot log in to that organization's account anywhere other than the registered devices, correct? Meaning you have to first register a device within the organization. Post that only you can log into those organizational internal URLs within that device. Where do you think those device details get registered or cataloged? Those are within the Azure Active Directory itself under the device section. So it's via this that a device gets linked to a user and then the authentication and authorization happens. Now I used a terminology called authentication and authorization. Another new terminology. Can someone state me what does authentication and authorization mean? Let's keep this interactive, correct? Do say
So
what
authentication is the process to someone like need to have access. So unauthorization is go ahead.
privileges to perform something.
Yeah.
Okay. So authentication is somewhat correct. Authorization is correct. So in layman terminology, if I have to explain, correct? Imagine that I want to travel from Bangalore to Mumbai tomorrow. Today via Air India. So I have to go to the airport. Now in airport, before we are allowed entry into the airport, the security does check an identity card, correct? They validate whether the user who is actually present is the same user. So they're authenticating whether he's a valid user or not. That is authentication. Correct. Now, everyone has an Aadhaar card or a PAN card. So, can anyone who has Aadhaar card go within the airport? No, because they are not supposed to, because they do not have the right aspect to go. In order to go within the airport, you need to have a plane ticket bought. That is authorization. So even if you are authenticated, meaning even if I match as Nandan with my ID, but am I allowed to go? That is authorization. So only if I have a valid ticket, then only I'll be allowed to go within the airport, even if I have a valid Aadhaar card, PAN card, or even passport. So authentication and authorization goes hand in hand. First, always an authentication takes place. Post that, authorization happens. So devices, so in layman terminology, Active Directory can be considered as a catalog of users, applications, and devices. Now, I'll come to some of the, I'll discuss users, groups, enterprise applications, and app registrations tomorrow in detail. Today, we need to discuss on custom domain names. I'll take next 2 minutes to discuss on that. Now, as I said, correct, all the users who get created within the within this Active Directory would be created with the name username @yldf7.onmicrosoft.com. That's the default name that gets created whenever you buy a subscription. But does it make sense for anyone to send this in this format? The Teams Meet invite that I sent, Nandan Hegde @datasharksedu.onmicrosoft.com. For most of the users, that email would have gone into spam or junk itself, because this is not a proper domain name. So certain aspects put it under spam or junk email for validation aspect. But as a large organization, should it be in this format? No. So for that, basically, Microsoft provides us to buy some custom domain names. So in that case, I can go, but these are paid. This domain name I got free whenever I bought an Azure subscription. But in case if I want a custom domain name for myself, that is, if I want the email to be sent as username @datasharks.com, signifying this is my organization rather than on Microsoft additional aspect, I have to buy a custom domain name. That first it would check. To add a domain name, you must already own a domain name. So I have to buy a domain name from Microsoft. I have to purchase it, and there is some cost associated with that. And hence, I can move away from the default name and move on to proper organizational name. That is what organizations usually do. That is, once they purchase the subscription, they would get a default tenant name or a directory name. Post that, they purchase a specific domain name, but for that a specific cost is involved, and then I can associate that domain name with the users. So an organization can have multiple domain names, as meaning I can purchase multiple domain names. But now, since this domain name nandan.com, since this is unverified, meaning I have yet not purchased it, but imagine that this is available, meaning I have purchased it. No one else can use nandan.com. It's similar to Gmail. Gmail is one of the domain that is already present, correct, across. So I cannot go and purchase gmail.com. Similarly, there would be other domain names that are already available, like Accenture or Capgemini. They might have their own domain names. Those cannot be bought. So domain names are supposed to be unique. I hope, Ramesh, I answered some of your query, someone who had asked, correct, with respect to name. So even though it provides us with a default name, I can go and purchase custom domain names to represent my organization. But for that, cost is involved. And unfortunately, I do not have that much amount to spend unnecessarily on the custom domain. Hence, I'm keeping it a default domain itself. So this concludes today's session. For tomorrow's session, I do need everyone to have your Azure subscription ready and you having your own tenant. So once you activate your Azure subscription today, log into portal.azure.com and go and check your tenant properties. In case if it is some unique tenant name, meaning you are the owner within that tenant, else you might be part of some other organization tenant. So please have this subscription ready for tomorrow's call. So because we will be looking at how to add users, how to create users, etc. So this
Yeah, then
concludes
just one question on the last thing that you explained. So name and domain name, they are the same thing, right?
what do you mean by name here?
The name in the tenant. When you
No,
go to-
no, Anamika, correct. See, a domain name are as I said, correct. There is 1:n relationship between a tenant and a domain, correct. Within a single tenant, correct, I can have multiple domains.
Okay.
What I mean by that is, see, whenever you purchase whenever you do business with Microsoft, a unique ID gets created, which is the tenant ID.
Correct.
Agree? That's what we saw. Now, corresponding to the tenant ID, a default tenant name gets associated to you all. Correct? So, oh, sorry. So that is this default name. But I can, as an organization, I want my users to have a proper username. Correct? Like username @ myorganization.com or something.com rather than yldf7.onmicrosoft.com. Correct? So at that time, I can purchase multiple domains. So I can purchase datasharks.com. So my user's email ID within this tenant can be either @yldf7.onmicrosoft.com or can be either @nandan.com or can be @datasharks.com.
Okay, got it.
So domain provides me a flexibility to manage my email preferences and other communication preferences that we would see tomorrow once we deep dive into the user aspects.
Okay.
So one tenant can have multiple domains and the original tenant name is by default the domain name that is pre-established to you. And you can buy more domains for yourself.
Yes.
And
Okay.
those would
So
be
multiple domains are associated with one tenant, you're saying, right?
sorry.
Multiple domains can be associated with one
Correct.
tenant.
Correct.
Nandan, I have something to ask. Can I just share my screen?
Yes.
Are you able to see my screen? I mean, this is my admin account. I mean, this is one of my test tenant. Hello.
Yes, you are. It's visible. Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, this is the tenant. Looks like I'm able to access the Fabric platform, but when I try to going to the Azure portal, it is asking me to test with trial. It will give 1 month. It will give 1 month trial. My question is, if I choose trial with this account, with this tenant, would that be a problem for me? Because it's located in, I think it's US, I guess.
No, the region does not matter, but do you have admin access within that tenant?
Yeah, I'm the admin. I'm the global admin for this tenant.
Okay, then this should suffice. This tenant, you can activate a tenant within you can activate the subscription within this tenant. It should suffice. Region does not matter for us for development purposes, because rather than 1 millisecond, it would take you 5 milliseconds. It's just that latency. As a developer, as a sandbox, it does not matter majorly.
Okay. If I start Azure, it will, what are the, I mean, will it require the credit card?
As I said at the start, yes, you do have to provide a credit card detail. Correct. It would do a $1 transaction and credit it back. It is just to validate the authenticity of your credit card. Correct.
Okay.
There won't why is the credit card details provided? Because in case if you're overextending your credit of more than
$200.
$200, I think. Yeah.
dollars, it would start charging from the credit card itself.
Okay.
Clear?
Nandan, for Active Directory, sorry, yeah, you complete first question, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, my question is, after 30 days, I will lose the access to this Azure portal, right? Credits will be completed.
No. Credits would be completed, but you would still have access to the Azure portal. You can stop sharing this. Credits are completed, but since the tenant is your personal tenant, correct? You would still be able to log into Azure portal Azure, but you won't be able to leverage the services within that. You would be able to just see a read-only version, but you won't be able to leverage the services within that.
Okay, from 31st day, if I want to use any services, I need to pay or it will charge.
Correct.
Okay. I'm done. Thank you.
Next, yes.
Nandan, that see, once he activates that Azure subscription, I know, like for some of our Azure resources, we have cost that gets the clock starts, right? Like while activating the Azure Active Directory also, does that clock start for credits?
No. Basically, that 30 days is not with see, Active Directory is a free resource. Correct.
Okay.
It's not.
That is what I wanted to confirm.
Correct. But your 30 days clock starts from the day you activate. So irrespective of whether you use that $200 credit or not, the day on which you activate post 30 days, it would get decimated to zero.
Okay.
Clear?
And then whichever come first, right? Either the completed 30 days or $200, right?
That is true.
$200, correct.
Yeah.
And then we have this session for almost 1.5 months, right? So within 30 days, I mean after 30 days, as he said, it will be only read only. So all our practicals we will have to do within 30 days then, right?
For that, there are other aspects as well, correct? Since it's Azure, it's Microsoft Fabric. There is a Microsoft Fabric free trial that gives you additional 30 days, correct? But unfortunately, depending on certain tenants, in case if it is a new tenant, I'll come to that discussion later. There might be some limitations as well because of misuse that I said my folks are doing. So in that case, unfortunately, you must have to create a separate Microsoft account and enable a separate subscription for yourself.
Okay.
Yeah. So team, any other queries?
So Nandan, you are going to share this session, recorded session?
No, Pallavi, this is an internal within the aspect. It won't be shared. Okay. So